How's it going, y'all? So I'm just kind of going to have a discussion here about testing and kind of explain to you what we do on our project at work, how we do our testing, why we do our testing, and I'm not going to give you the whole overview, just a couple of useful tools that I think if you're a beginner, you should definitely look into and learn how to use for yourself and understand the kind of importance of all this. So testing can be broken down into many different like subfields. So you have like unit testing, you have integration testing, you have end-to-end testing, and you have smoke testing, performance testing. There's keywords like acceptance testing, accessibility testing. There's a lot of things that you can do to basically automatically run these checks on your code base to make sure that something is doing the thing it should be doing. So let's start with the basic one. Actually, let me start with something not as basic. Let me start with end-to-end testing. That one kind of makes more sense from a user's perspective. So let's say you're running an application, a UI, for a business, and the business says that when a user clicks on the login button, they should be able to log in with their information, click the login form, submit it, and get redirected to a page called /dashboard. Okay. So one way that you can kind of verify this is obviously you could pay someone to go into your UI once you deploy this to production. They can click around in the UI and verify that when they follow those same steps, they get rerouted to a page called /dashboard. And a lot of companies do this, right? You pay someone else. Sometimes they offshore this to other countries and just pay like really cheap labor to have people kind of click through the UI and verify stuff is working before deployments. And this works okay, but it's just like not 100% necessary, especially since there's a ton of automated ways you can do this. So one way is using a tool called Cypress. This is an open source tool, I believe. They do have like a paid service you can use. I don't use it, but you basically install Cypress and you can run it. And it kind of loads up a Chrome browser. Sorry, I don't have like example code. I'm kind of just doing a talk in this video, but it loads up a Chrome browser and you can give it like steps. So you can say like, hey, go to page /login. And you can tell it to then click on a element such as a form input like this one. You can tell it to automatically click on this. And then you can tell Cypress start typing in something. So I can type in like hello. And then you can tell Cypress to press the enter on your keyboard or press the submit button. And in that login example, you can have it automatically type in a username and password, click login. And then there's some expect things you can use as well. So you can say like expect to be on page, whatever. All right, let's go to some examples. Let's see if they have anything. Tutorials is always a great place to start. Testing a React to-do app. They have a bunch of videos here, which I'm not going to read through. So let's see if I can just find some examples. They have this like recipes thing. I don't know what this is. It's probably just examples of how you can write a spec file. So here's a better example. You have an actual spec file, which you can see you write like a describe block that kind of describes what the title of the test is. And then you can kind of set the test up to have it go to a particular page. So in this example, they're saying go to index HTML here, right? So Cypress will actually load up Chrome or Electron or whatever, Edge browser you want to use. It'll go to that URL. And then you kind of keep on going through these different test cases, right? So the first test case, it tries to get a DOM element that has an ID of users. And then it verifies that that DOM element has an attribute called href, and that href includes a users.html. So basically, they're making sure that the header or something has a link to the user's page. And I'm assuming that somewhere down here, they probably click it. Yeah, they click it here. And then they verify that the URL is changed to the user's page. Okay, so this is like super important because when you have a large application with like 10 developers working on it or more, there's a high chance that someone makes a code change which completely breaks the login functionality or completely breaks the shopping cart checkout functionality. So these critical pieces of your application that probably should never break, you want to cover with as much testing as possible, because if someone can't buy their product or buy your product or someone can't log in, then they basically aren't going to be able to give your business profit, right? Imagine if the Amazon checkout button didn't work. You know how much money they lose every second if that checkout button became broken? So you want to have these automated tests that basically verify that users can do the most critical pieces of functionality. Now, the issue with end-to-end testing is that they can become really slow. The more tests that you write, the more that your CI/CD pipeline has to basically click through Chrome. And after you have like tens of 20s of 30s of these tests, stuff starts to take a long time to verify everything. You imagine an application like GitHub, how many tests that you would have to verify to make sure that this button works, that this button works, this button works, these dropdowns work. All of these links actually go to the right pages. Like all of these tabs actually do something. So you can imagine GitHub probably has like thousands of tests, or hundreds at least, of end-to-end tests to verify certain functionality works. So what people recommend is that you do the most critical pieces in your end-to-end testing, just to make sure that everything works, pretty smoothly when you actually deploy to production. So that's kind of one approach. And then you can start going down into more granular levels. So there's something called the testing pyramid. Let me go ahead and load that up real quick. And some people don't agree with this, but I think it's a great way to verify your application does what it does. So basically, as you build out your application, you're going to be making tests, okay? Some of these tests are really slow to run, and they take a long time to write, all right? So end-to-end tests or UI tests, they're kind of the same thing. These cost the most money because the developer has to spend a lot more time maintaining them and writing them. They're also a lot slower, so they take longer to run in your integration pipeline. Okay, so you don't want to write too many of these because it's going to take hours for your entire application to be fully tested. And then going up a level or down a level, these become cheaper to write because they're easier to write, and they don't test the full application, so they're faster. So these are called integration tests. And then at the very bottom, there's unit tests. These run the fastest. You can have thousands of these, and they run pretty quick in your pipeline, and they're a lot cheaper to test, or they're a lot cheaper to write because they're easy, they're fast. Some people say don't write unit tests. I think those people are smoking something strong. I think they're all of these have benefits, and it's just a matter of like investing more time into some at the bottom than the ones at the top. So in terms of how do you write integration tests and unit tests? Well, in our team, we use something called Jest, which is a test runner where you can basically verify your code does what it's supposed to do. So inside of Jest, you can basically import functions and stuff. So let's say you have a JavaScript file called sum that exports a function called sum. If you use Jest, you can basically write a test like this, import your function, you can run your function like this, and verify that when you run the function of sum1, 2, that it actually returns the value of 3. So it's kind of a lower level test to just test a function in its individual isolated state. This can get more complicated because sometimes you need to add in something called mocking. If you have a function that kind of writes to a database or writes to a third-party API service, you might want to pass in a mock or use like jest.mock or jest.spy on to kind of prevent that unit, that function, from actually accessing a external dependency. Because again, we're trying to make these tests as fast as possible. And if these tests are writing to the database every single time, it's going to slow down a lot of stuff. And it's also going to make it hard to test because sometimes you can't verify certain things without mocking them out. Like, how do you verify that if the database is acting really slow? How do you verify that, right? In an integration test, you can't just put a bunch of pressure on your database and then run your unit test and verify that you get certain types of exceptions. You want to mock that out so that every time the MySQL database throws back a too many requests exception, your code can handle it. Right? So something that's really important is like learning about spying and mocking. I'm not going to go through all this. I'm just kind of giving you an overview. But we do this. We use Jest for our integration tests and our unit tests. And really, the main difference between integration and unit tests is that a unit test just tests like an isolated function or an isolated module or isolated class and try to mock out all your third-party dependencies. An integration test is something that would integrate different components together, right? So a good example of an integration test is in React. Let's say you have a component that needs to update some Redux state, okay? So you can verify that by testing the component using integration test, when you click on a certain button, that the Redux state is updated to a certain value, I guess you can say. So that's like a integration test that's really only integrating two components together, but you can keep integrating more and more together if you want. until you've basically integrated everything, and then it becomes like an end-to-end test, right? Um, so the last thing I kind of want to mention is that there's also like different types of testing, right? People usually talk about like unit testing, end-to-end testing, and integration testing, but there's also like accessibility testing. How do you verify that your UI works for people who have some type of blindness, or like it could be like color blindness, or it could be straight up like I can't see that well. So in order to achieve that, we do something called Pally, which kind of makes sure that like, your color contrasts are working good. Your UI has the correct ARIA labels set up. So a user, if they're using like a screen reader, they can actually click nav and kind of go through the app. Because you might not know if you're a beginner, but there's a lot of people out there who actually use tab and shift tab to navigate. And then they press enter to kind of enter into different pages, right? And if they're completely blind, you might have to use something called a screen reader, while as you click tab, it actually reads out like what you're highlighted on, or they can, read out the entire paragraph for you if you want to. So you need to have different types of testing kind of set up to verify that your application is going to work for people who have disabilities. I didn't really touch on the other types of checks that you have. There's like linting that you can do on your application to make sure your code's up to standard. You can do some type of prettifier to make sure your code formatting all looks identical. Like if you have 10 developers all working on the same code base, you don't want them all to write their own style of code, right? You want this tool to basically run over your code and format it to make it all look uniform. It makes it really consistent and really, easy to kind of go into any component and kind of use the same type of styling, I guess you can say. So this is just like an overview of testing. A couple people in my Discord channel have asked about testing, or asked if they should learn Cypress. I have to say yes, learn about testing. It's definitely important. If you're working at any reputable company, and they're like, they should be doing testing. If you're at a company where they're not doing testing because it takes too much time or doesn't save money, that's a red flag to me. I would get the hell out of that company. Mainly because I personally feel like testing saves a ton of time and headache, because it can verify when you're about to ship a bug to production, right? But if you like this overview, it's just like a little, little discussion talk video. Give me a thumbs up. Anyway, have a good day. Happy coding.